Hi, Mystery Recapped here. Today I'm going to explain an action mystery film called The Calculator.
Oh, yay!
Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The movie opens by explaining how thousands of years ago, the Earth became uninhabitable and humans abandoned it in search of another planet. They migrated to different habitable planets and built civilizations with diverse governments. Some were prosperous, others corrupt and oppressive. Eventually, these planets united to form the League of the Free World, an organization dedicated to addressing the problems that affected the entire interplanetary community. One of the planets that humans took over was XT-59, which was covered in impenetrable swamps. But despite this, the people managed to build a very advanced city called Titanium, and there are many bizarre creatures wandering around this planet. Therefore, Titanium is covered by shields to protect its people from these dangerous creatures. This planet is just the worst part of a Dark Souls game. The scene then cuts to the prison of Titanium, where we see 10 prisoners being sent to serve their sentence. An officer makes an announcement revealing that they have been given one final chance to survive, as there is no death penalty on this planet. The prisoners will be released into the swamps, and 300 kilometers from there, they will find a place called Happy Island. However, it is far from an easy task to reach it, as the planet is infested with dangerous creatures. Next, the guards bring a man in a hood outside the city and ask him to walk 20 steps forward. After walking, the prisoner comes across a stone, which he kicks with his leg, and it hits the shield in front of him. This makes the prisoner terrified, and he believes they were trying to kill him and make it look like an accident. The guards then remove the mask and reveal the prisoner's face, and it turns out his name is Irvin. That's unfortunate. Following this, the guards temporarily shut down the shield and push all the prisoners outside the city. They also drop a metal box containing supplies, along with some weapons and food that could help them survive. Moments later, the shield is activated again, and now all the prisoners are stuck outside. A man named Van declares himself the leader and nicknames himself Polar Wolf. Okay, someone kill Van. He tries to convince everyone to follow him, claiming that he has managed to survive this before. Van then orders everyone to introduce themselves, but their conversation is interrupted by the noise caused by a creature with long arms, which leaves them terrified. Irvin tells them that the creature is called a pagan, which reacts to vibrations and is thus weak to dildos. After the creature leaves, Irvin decides not to follow Van in the group because he has more knowledge than they do. He chooses to journey alone, but a woman named Christy also decides to go with him. This enrages Van, but Irvin does not care and moves to open the supply box, causing all the prisoners to rush toward it. Irvin quickly grabs a knife from the box while others focus on eating. Van intimidates everyone and takes control of the box, declaring that if they do not ration everything his way, only he will survive. However, Irvin refuses to accept Van as a leader based solely on strength, so Van's minion approaches Christy and proceeds to humiliate her. Irvin then places a knife to a guy and demands his and Christy's share of food, backpacks, poles, and rope poles. It turns out that attacking one another is against the rules, and if they violate this, the guards will shoot all of them to death. With no other choice, Van reluctantly hands over their share of supplies. Irvin then says he needs one more thing, which is the empty metal box. Van demands their food as payment, so Irvin reluctantly gives him both his share and Christie's for the box, believing it will be useful in the future. The two then leave, while Van tells the group that he does not think those two will survive for long. Later, Christy notices a woman named Maria struggling to assemble her pole and suggests that they should take her along as well, but Irvin refuses and says the woman does not stand a chance out here. Following this, the two begin their journey, and Irvin ties them both with a rope so that they can drag the box as they make their way to Happy Island. Soon they realize that the box is very heavy, which makes it difficult and slow to move. Shortly after, they are approached by a woman named Layla, who wants to join their team and offers to share her supplies and do anything to help them. However, Irvin says he has already chosen his partner and cannot take anyone else, but Layla claims that her husband Matthias decided to hide in the city and insists that she would be far more useful to Irvin than Christy. However, their conversation is abruptly interrupted when bullets are suddenly fired from a fortress. Horrified, Irvin quickly grabs Christy and both of them take cover behind a rock. They then notice Layla, who didn't die but is still alive, and Irvin realizes that the shot was intended for him. He asks Layla to return to her group, and the annoyed woman has no choice but to oblige. Irvin and Christy then continue their journey, and along the way they notice a small, crawling creature. Christy is scared, but Irvin explains that they are harmless and could even serve as food, which disgusts Christy. She then comments that she thinks Happy Island is just a rumor and doesn't exist, but Irvin argues that it must exist, since the guards earlier wouldn't have tried to kill him if there were no chance of survival in the swamps. Elsewhere, we see a military captain communicating with the president, who is frustrated that they failed to eliminate Irvin. The captain explains that Irvin was aware of the attacks and clever enough to avoid them. We also learn that the shooter was Matthias, the prisoner who stayed behind and is working under the orders of the government. In another scene, Christy and Irvin decide to take a rest, during which Christy cleans herself with some water flowing from a rock. All of a sudden, Irvin approaches her slowly from behind and asks her not to move, which leaves her confused. Suddenly, a bizarre creature erupts from the ground, and Irvin tries to cover it with his jacket. Is it his boner? But he is attacked in the process. Christy immediately grabs a knife and cuts the creature's tentacle, freeing Irvin. The man then creates a weapon from the tentacle, but it turns out he has been injured from the attack. So Christy proceeds to tend to his wounds and reveals how she ended up in prison. It turns out she had tried to get a divorce permit, but a government worker attempted to assault her. She had no choice but to defend herself and ended up killing the man. Just then, they are confronted by Van, who arrives with his group and demands the metal box. Irvin refuses to hand it over, so Van orders his minions to seize it by force. However, Irvin skillfully wields the tentacle weapon from earlier and demonstrates its power, which scares the group. With no other option, Van retreats while Irvin and Christy continue their journey. Not long after, Irvin senses the presence of a creature and becomes alert, so he lies down on the ground and tells Christy to do the same. We then notice that Van and his group are also following the duo. Suddenly, the pagan creature erupts from the ground and begins attacking them. Everyone throws themselves to the ground, but one of the men panics and starts to run. The creature immediately grabs him and ends his life on the spot. Christy is horrified and wants to help the others, but Irvin reminds her that she cannot do everything for them and makes her continue their journey. At the same time, the president is losing patience and hopes that the captain will manage to catch Irvin, whom he refers to as an advisor. Elsewhere, Irvin shares with Christy that he was a mathematician, and she goes and then asks how he ended up here. He promises to tell her if she solves a riddle and says that a girl needs 9 coins to buy a chocolate bar and a boy needs 1 coin. They meet and decide to buy a chocolate bar together and split it in half, but they still end up 1 coin short after buying it. So Irvin asks her what was the price of the chocolate bar. However, Christy is so bored by the riddle and she didn't have access to ChatGPT, so she falls asleep. Meanwhile, Irvin goes for a walk nearby, and not long after, Christy wakes up and is horrified to see a large number of creatures approaching her. The panicked woman tries to run away but comes across Irvin, who makes her hide inside the metal box with him. They close the lid, after which they hear the creatures desperately trying to get in without success. Not long after, the creatures finally give up and retreat, allowing the duo to emerge from the box. They then notice that the box is now badly damaged, and even the handle is broken, making it no longer useful. Following this, the duo continues their journey without the box, and soon comes across the actual swamp. Irvin asks Christy to walk in front of him, explaining that if she falls, he will be able to save her more easily, since she weighs less than him. Meanwhile, Van and his group continue to follow them, but he soon grows tired and tells everyone to rest for a while. But Layla disagrees and worries about losing Irvin, which could be their only chance to survive. She then cuts off her rope and begins running toward Irvin, prompting an angry Van to follow her. Unfortunately, he gets caught in the swamp and calls for help from his group. However, no one is willing to help him, and they continue moving forward. An old man named Job considers rescuing him, but Layla reveals to him that Irvin used to be an advisor to the president and has knowledge about this area, so they should be following him instead. The group begins to leave, but a man named Jan ultimately helps Van and gets him out of the swamp. Elsewhere, Christy asks Irvin why he was in prison, and he reveals that he used to be the president's advisor. She laughs upon hearing this, but soon realizes that he is telling the truth. "You were lying about being a mathematician though, right?" "No, He then explains how he discovered the president's corrupt actions and how his moral conscience prevented him from continuing to work. Therefore, the president made him a prisoner and sent him into exile in the swamps. Irvin also reveals that he had planned for this survival in advance. He managed to launch a virus into the government's control system, which will soon cut off their control over the planet. The system can only be turned off with the code, and he is the only one who knows it. Once the system collapses, free people will be able to build a new independent city management system. Upon hearing this, Christie is shocked and warns that the authorities will find him soon, but Irvin is confident that he will already be at Happy Island by then. And as the name suggests, he'll be getting tugged by alien tentacle people. Meanwhile, in the city, the system starts to break down as the communications satellites go offline. The officials attempt to resolve the issue, but the system requests an unknown password and advises erasing all data. Back in exile, Layla and the group come across two people and approach them, thinking they are Irvin and Christie, but they turn out to be prisoners who have been stuck there for a long time and have turned into cannibals. The cannibals immediately attack them and manage to capture Maria. Her desperate screams are even heard by Christie, who asks Irvin to help her, but he refuses, telling her that the other woman is already dead and that he doesn't want to create more problems. Maria eventually stops screaming after the cannibals kill her with a rock and begin devouring her. Meanwhile, Christie begins crying over her fate and wonders who could have come up with such a brutal method of punishment. Shockingly, Irvin reveals that it was he who proposed the idea to the president, believing it to be the most humane option. Christie calls him a monster, as if being a mathematician wasn't bad enough, but he argues that nobody protested against the law when it was announced, meaning they also believed it was the right thing to do. An angry Christie calls him a coward and says it would have been better if he had died at the shield, so that no one would know his code. A guilty Irvin runs away and begins screaming to attract the creature's attention, hoping they will kill him, but nothing appears. The duo then continues moving forward, during which Christie reveals that she was offered freedom by the officials in exchange for killing Irvin, but she refused. Elsewhere, Van finds Layla and the group hiding behind the rocks to escape the cannibals. He grabs Layla by the neck, so she apologizes for abandoning him earlier. She also reveals how the officials had asked her to kill Irvin in exchange for her freedom. After completing the mission, Layla is expected to arrive at a place called Rotten Marsh, where a government vessel will rescue her. It turns out that the officials have placed a tracking device on her body, which is actually hidden on her ankle. Van tries to remove it with a knife, but a desperate Layla attempts to run away and is captured by another creature. Everyone watches in horror as the cobweb-like creature drags Layla to the ground and suffocates her to death. Elsewhere in the facility, the captain notices that little by little the prisoners are falling, so he decides to send Matthias to catch Irvin. Back in exile, Van's group loses another prisoner when he approaches a bag, which releases a strange black powder. Van realizes that his only chance of survival is to capture Irvin and deliver him to the government. After a while, Jan approaches Irvin and asks for help, claiming he has abandoned his group. Irvin doesn't trust him and tells Christie to stay away from the guy, but she refuses to listen and moves straight toward Jan. At this moment, someone strikes Irvin with an iron bar and knocks him unconscious. Not long after, Irvin wakes up and notices that his hands are tied and that Van and his group may have captured him. Christie feels that she may never see Irvin again, so she decides to give him a farewell kiss. After all, he's probably a virgin. Irvin tries to warn Van that the authorities need him alive, but they will kill Van once they get him. But the bald man refuses to listen. Irvin refuses to move, so Van carries him on his shoulder and begins walking, followed closely by the remaining survivors, Christie, Job, and Jan. Not long after, they arrive at Rotten Marsh, which is the ruins of an old prison that is home to wild animals. Van puts down Irvin and goes to meet Matthias to negotiate his release in exchange for Irvin. But when they return, they discover that Irvin has freed himself and escaped. This enrages Matthias, who shoots Van in the leg and begins searching for Irvin himself. Moments later, Matthias finds Christie and Jan, so he immediately kills the man and captures Christie. Upon seeing this, Irvin finally decides to come out of hiding, but demands that Matthias release Christie in exchange for his surrender. Matthias agrees, after which Irvin surrenders himself, while Christie is freed and joins Job. But in a shocking shocking twist, an injured Van appears from behind and stabs Matthias with a bayonet. Before dying, Matthias shoots Christie, but fortunately, it is just a tranquilizer dart. Irvin then thanks Van for his help, after which the bald man takes a capsule of poison to end his suffering. In the end, only Christie, Job, and Irvin survive and manage to leave the place. They come across a vast sea filled with small islands made of dense, floating swamp. They climb onto one of the islands and use it as a raft, but after a while, it begins to submerge. While they are wondering how to survive, Job jumps into the water, thinking the raft cannot hold all three of them. Irvin tries to save him, but soon a creature appears in the water and devours poor Job. And that's what he gets for having seen Titanic. Upon seeing this, Irvin and Christie are saddened, but continue their journey. Meanwhile, the president orders the captain to capture Irvin as soon as possible, since the system is starting to fail due to the virus. But the captain knows that trying to capture Irvin would be pointless and instructs a drone to knock them down. However, the system has already been infected by the virus, causing the drone to malfunction and crash into the water before it can reach Irvin. Upon seeing this, Irvin and Christie celebrate their victory, knowing that the virus is working. They soon come across a large waterfall, which throws them and leads to another island. Irvin explains that there is a secret base on the island for the president, which houses a spaceship activated by a code, but he has forgotten the last digit of the code. Christie states that the president must have told him something. Irvin recalls that before the president came up with the last digit, he had asked Irvin the same riddle about the bar of chocolate. The correct answer was 10, but the president thought it was 9. Christie tells him that the code must be 9, so Irvin decides to enter it, but there are only 2 attempts. Irvin first inputs an incorrect code to verify that the system and software are working correctly. What? During the last attempt, he enters 9, after which the secret base opens, and inside they find a spaceship. Christie is excited, but Irvin asks her to use the ship, since it only has 1 seat. However, she refuses to abandon him and expresses that she has fallen in love with him, after which they share a passionate kiss. Together, they share the same seat and leave in search of another place with better conditions. Right after they abandon Titanium, the planetary system collapses due to the virus. They eventually each find another planet, and the League of Free Worlds becomes aware of the atrocities committed on XT-59. The movie ends, revealing that approximately 10 years later, a new system is established in XT-59, but it is far more cruel than the previous one.